Well, now, y'all want to buy the latest technology and wagonry. This is it. I mean, look at the curves on this one. That box in the front, that's designed to hold your shotgun, your rope, brakes if you need them to have a stop. But why would you want to stop in this slick mobile vehicle of the day? Those wheels, genuine wood all the way around with metal banding. That means, that's right, you'll plow straight through those rivers, straight across the desert, straight across the prairie. Hell, you might even drive over your own horses. This thing is so fast.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of How to Be a Great GM. My name is Guy, and today we're looking at vehicle combat. It's a question that's come up on the Discord channel, as well as on emails and in the comments down below. How to make vehicle combat interesting. We're not just talking about vehicle combat using old wagons from the Wild West like the one behind me. We're talking about any kind of vehicle combat, be that perhaps in a modern day setting, perhaps it's an even older wagon, something in the medieval period where it's more Dungeons and Dragons and the like. Now, a lot of rule systems have some very specific rules for chase sequences, and they can be very, very good. Now, this is also not looking at personal chase sequences, so when characters are on foot being chased by other characters. I've already done a video on that. You can go and have a look for it. This is specifically how to make vehicle combat that much more interesting, and the origins of this entire thought process, just so that you know where it comes from, is we've just released for pre-sale my book, A Complete Guide to Nautical Campaigns, in which ships chase one another. Now, it's a supplement to Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Links are down below if you want to go and jump in on that. And we had a very strong look at vehicle combat, how to make vehicle chases, vehicle combat that much more interesting and faster as well, so that you don't end up with this constant roll. There are many systems out there, whether it's Call of Cthulhu or something simpler, in terms of your mechanics, where these kinds of rules, I think, are going to be applicable across the board. So if you have vehicular combat, if you have vehicles chasing one another, I think that these are going to be useful for you regardless of what system you use. Bearing in mind, of course, that if you like this video, hit that like button. If you want more, hit the subscribe button, and the Goblin Bell will always alert you to new releases. They come out thick and fast on this channel now. So much information to share with everybody. And of course, your comments are read, if not necessarily responded to. I do read them all and take them into account as we create videos for you. That's the whole purpose. So let's jump right into it. Vehicle combat. So distance. Distance is a thing that we need to look at. Distance is frequently something that role-playing systems have not necessarily taken into account. For example, in modern day settings, there are lots of high-powered rifles that can see more than 1 kilometer in distance. There are lots of weapons that can fire over 100 kilometers in distance. Even 120 years ago, there were large cannons that could fire upwards of 10 kilometers, which is what, I don't know in miles, 5 miles, 6 miles, 7 miles away. From a PC to PC perspective, that range is ridiculous. A lot of role-playing systems have got movement trackers where you move 30 feet around, or you move a meter around, or 10 meters around, or however your system might work. And when you start looking at that scale, where you are dealing with thousands of feet, things start to break down. It also starts to break down when you start looking at movement speeds for vehicles. So if they are drawn by an animal, most animals can outpace a human in a dead sprint. Maybe not over a long period of time, but certainly in a dead sprint, which is generally speaking when these kinds of situations require us to have a basic understanding of how to do combat. Usually it's on a round-by-round basis. So what do we do? How do we handle it? Do we run it in real time? Again, I think that doesn't make sense. If you have two wagons chasing each other across the Great Plains, and they are separated by a mile, which arguably is how far away one could see the approaching wagon, how is that really going to translate into something that's exciting? You see them, they see you, no one can do anything about it because you're so far away. The general effect of spells and of powers have never been described to being 5,000 feet of range. It just doesn't happen. That's roughly how many feet there are in a mile. So it really becomes ridiculous to try and run it in real time. You will spend rounds and rounds and rounds of two chasing wagons never getting close to each other. So then that means that all of your chase sequences have to be ambush type chase sequences where the wagon pops out from behind a cactus or the little spaceship pops out from behind a nebula, and they're almost at point blank range already. That reduces your options. So I then propose that you go with a scale. Now for the ship supplement that we did, that's coming out, we designed this. This is a scale tracker for below the water and above the water. This was a little 3D model that we made just to do as a mock-up. There's a wind direction. This is because it's for sailing ships. And then there's a range, and that range is 800 feet, 400 feet, 300 feet. I'll bring it up on the screen. 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 foot, and 0 foot. 800 feet away. If you think about that in terms of how fast can a human run, a lot of systems will put it at between 60 and 100 feet around. At 800 feet away, that's 8 rounds of just moving closer to your target. So we said that doesn't make much sense. So let's abandon the idea of real time and let's go to scale time. So it's scale time. It goes from 800, it goes to 400. From 400 it goes down to 300, then to 200, so it's getting closer and closer. And as we start getting to ranges, that's the 200 to 0 range, we start to break it down smaller and smaller and smaller so that characters can then act appropriately and can actually affect things. Because that's the bottom line, and you're going to see that in a little bit as we get onto that video. So I prefer to work with a scale. If you're doing a high-speed chase with automobiles and it's set in the 1980s, your scale might be 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, and then less than, so 1,000 meters, 500, etc., etc. It just means that what is happening is your characters are taking less actions per turn. The turns are no longer measured in seconds, but perhaps in minutes, but it allows you to speed up the chase sequence because you're not spending 20 rounds of rolling just to accommodate for 2 minutes of actual time travel, where the vehicle is traveling in real time. So that's always my advocate, and that's where we come to the timing. Is the case that if a car is chasing another vehicle, yes, inside the vehicle, people are free to act as they so choose, but a good car chase can take 15, 20, 25 minutes as cars slow down to go around corners, as wagons slow down to go around chasms, as ships slow down as they approach shallow water or avoid islands, or however it might be expressed. We don't want to sit playing through every single round. Rather break it up into chunks, into a scaled bite-sized chunk, so that you go, well, 1, 2, 3, there's actually 7 rounds of combat before, and that's of course if everything is equal and the pursuing vehicle is faster than the pursued vehicle. After 7 rounds there will be a point blank range, and then we're moving into close quarter combat, which is a whole different kettle of fish anyway, as opposed to 14, 24, 34 rounds where they're just basically chasing each other and no one's doing anything. So distance for me is a major factor in terms of making your vehicle combat that much more interesting. It isn't the only factor, though. The other factor is the actions. Now, this is the important thing as far as I'm concerned, is that PCs, everyone must contribute. Now, you're sitting there going, well, how can in a vehicle that's only got 1 pilot seat, how can everyone contribute? This has been something that has plagued me as a game master for a long time. Space combat, you always get someone who's happy to be the pilot, but no one's really happy to be the chief of operations. Or perhaps you get an engineer, but no one wants to be a gunner because they'd rather be a Jedi. In more fantastic kind of situations, well, you might have a ship's captain, but who really wants to be the quartermaster of the ship? It seems rather dull, and during combat, what is the quartermaster actually going to be doing? Hiding? Waiting for the ship to get to within 200 yards or 200 feet so they can start using their magic spells? All those kinds of things are a major factor in determining how interesting vehicle combat can be. So everyone needs to contribute. And I think the important thing here is when you then step back and you say, all right, so instead of relying on everybody contributing in terms of their own actions and then their actions being taken up by operating the vehicle, which it does make sense in the case of an automobile where there's a pilot steering the vehicle. At the same time, though, it does become very boring for someone who is steering to only be able to steer. Yes, as the game master, you could give them obstacles to steer around, you could give them roles to make sure that their steering is correct, but again, most role-playing systems don't necessarily have this as a focus, and so have a limited number of skills that are appropriate. It also doesn't take into account PCs who don't have those skills as a focus. Suddenly now they're making roles which they have no chance of succeeding, and so your entire chase sequence falls flat because everyone wasn't geared up for it. So I think it's about stepping back and saying, okay, well, instead of just making everyone do what we would normally get them to do, let's look at vehicle combat from a different perspective. Let's look at vehicle combat from the perspective that the vehicle itself has a certain amount of autonomy and that the characters can still act as needed. Let us also assume that those that are in the vehicle can contribute in some shape, fashion, or form to the vehicle's operation. This does require you to think out of the box a little bit, and, well, after a while, we were looking, again, this is for the book, we were looking at how can we get someone who has no combat experience, no combat build, no anything for that matter, let's take an average Joe, and let's give them something to do. So what we came up with was we said, right, let's let the vehicle have a certain number of actions that it can perform. It can do certain things that require a free action or a simple command from the actual user. So in the case of a wagon, let's say, for example, the wagon might be a pretty good defensive platform. So if the player decides that their character is going to use the wagon as a defensive platform, the wagon itself starts to contribute to the player's actions. It's not just a platform from which the characters then would make a normal roll. So there's benefits to being on board of a vehicle. Otherwise, why be there? A vehicle provides cover and those kinds of things as well, but perhaps the driver, although they are driving, they're steering, they're holding the reins, whatever the situation might be, but perhaps they want to do something dramatic. At the same time, they have the ability to fire off a spell. If they want to do something dramatic, the vehicle itself can participate. It can include itself in those roles. Give the vehicle statistics, for example. Give it health. Give it abilities if your system uses abilities. If you're playing in something that has percentiles, for example, give the vehicle percentile chances of success and failure. So the driver might say, I want to do a right angle turn. What do I need to do? And can I do something whilst doing that? The answer is an emphatic yes. The vehicle makes the check to do the right angle turn using whatever system you want to use and maybe give the vehicle a value. It performs the check. If it fails, there are ramifications, of course. If it succeeds, well, now the player character, well, even regardless if it succeeds or not, but the player character can then take another action that they would normally be allowed to do. In other words, the player action and the vehicle action happen at the same time, and neither one penalizes the other. They do allow each other to complement one another, of course, and that, of course, is why you would be on a vehicle in the first place, apart from just the speed. I know it's a little bit convoluted, but generally I'm giving you the thought process behind it, not the actual mechanics themselves, because it's entirely up to you how you want to implement it. You then start getting back to the age-old question of what are the NPCs aboard the chasing vehicle or the pursued vehicle? What are they doing and how do they contribute in a meaningful way? I usually just average them out. So if it's a Cthulhu setting, I'll say, well, they have a base 35% chance to do whatever it is that they're doing. If I want them to be tough, I'll increase it by 20 or 30%. If I want them to be really, really easy, I'll decrease their skills by the same amount. So they're making rolls and just generic rolls as needed, rather than making a roll for each one. This is the other thing that we have to bear in mind when it comes to vehicle combat, is that generally vehicles will have more than one occupant. A lot of times they won't. Speeder bikes, penny farthings, and the like, or just a general horse, I suppose. The other alternative, the alternative, of course, is when there are lots of crew, say, for example, on a sailing ship where there might be equally or easily up to 200 individuals. How do you control that? you average them out. So you give them the same value and then they roll to see if they can do that. And how many times can they do that? Well, again, we just determined the size of the vehicle and said, well, a truly massive vehicle might be able to do 3 things. A smaller vehicle might only be able to do 1 or 2. So the PCs always have a slight advantage in terms of being able to do more things. It depends on how you want, because we wanted to keep moving. We don't want a chase combat to be static. That is exactly the opposite of what vehicle combat should be. It should not be static, because if it's static, it's basically just building combat. And that, unless you are Peter Jackson, is never going to be interesting. So you wanted to keep moving forward. So give the advantage to the PCs in terms of action economy, I suppose you could call it. At the same time, you've got all of those PCs engaged, because just because your PC isn't combative, maybe they wind the windows up on the vehicle, or perhaps they know something about mechanics so they can increase the vehicle speed by turning the air conditioning off. Who knows? That's entirely up to you to come up with the ways in which the vehicle could be enhanced, and then allowing the PCs to do that. So finally, when we look at it, we start to look down at complications. Now, complications are effectively a random thing that you can add in. You can make your own complication tables. Dungeons & Dragons has one in the DMG, and there are many that you can come up with. A complication table is effectively at the end of each round, where the vehicles have been moving around and chasing one another around and just going absolutely ballistic, a complication could occur. We said on a roll of a d20, on a 1, a complication would occur, and then we had a table of just 10 different complications that could occur. The ship hits a reef, there's a doldrum, there's a cross current, whatever the complication might be. If it's a traffic chase, perhaps they hit a red light, if the complication resulted. If it's a wagon chase, well, perhaps the road starts crumbling, perhaps the bridge is washed away, perhaps however it might be expressed, that's entirely up to you. However, it shouldn't slow down combat. So if the wagons are busy flying across the prairie and the wagon wheel hits a rut in the road and bounces and the entire cart sort of wobbles around, that's okay. That's not slowing it down. Yes, physically the wagon is now slowed down. Maybe its speed is reduced to whatever value it might be. On the other hand, the story is still moving forward. By slowing it down, I mean, okay, all right, so you hit a rut in the road. Okay, I want everybody on board to make a dexterity saving throw. Then I want everybody on board to make a strength roll. And then I want everyone on board to then do this roll and then to do that. That's complicating the situation and the math. It's not complicating the entire encounter. The vehicle combat is not interesting if you are doing that. You want it to move forward. It should have a sense of drama. You should increase the drama. So a wagon wheel breaks off. Your speed is reduced by 15 feet or 20 feet per round. What are you going to be doing? The enemy is now moving faster. So when you come to this track, the enemy is now moving 2 categories at a time rather than 1 category, or however you want to work it out. That becomes dramatically tense. Oh, they're going to gain on us. They can't board us because they outnumber us 2-1. We have to be doing something. And finally, it shouldn't be repetitive. Repetition is something that we have to avoid as GMs anyway, but it shouldn't be repetitive. It should not just be the same checks over and over again. This also goes back to where we were talking about those actions. If the character is always making a drive check to drive the vehicle, that's awfully boring, especially if the character has used that as a stat that they have increased exponentially, so the chances of them failing it are virtually 0. You're basically saying, just roll a dice because that's what the rules say, and there's very little outcome other than you succeed. You might as well just say you succeed. But how fun and how engaging is that for the PC, the fellow PCs, and for you as a GM? It isn't. So look at using different things. So it's a drive check now. The next one it might be make an observation check, make a spot check, make a sight check. The next one might be make a memory check to see if you can remember what the road is like up ahead, or a nature check so that you can determine that, oh, you can see that it's those type of bulrushes up ahead. That's possibly swampy territory. You might want to avoid avoid it. So try and look at things that, yes, increase the pressure on the parties so that they are moving faster, they have to escape. That's vehicle combat. You don't want them to just be sitting next to each other all the time. Again, we want there to be pulling away, maybe getting away, but there must be tension around that. So those are my thoughts on vehicular combat. I know it's a little bit chaotic, but generally the idea is have a scaled movement. Don't try and play it out inch by inch or meter by meter. Rather look at scaled, punctuated moments where the vehicles are getting closer. Look at complications, and then look at ways in which you can use your system to get the players on board, the characters that are on board those vehicles, to be making rolls to enhance the vehicle, as well as allowing them to take their own regular actions, rather than requiring them to take the actions of vehicle operation and prevent them from doing anything else, because it becomes a major lockdown for that particular character. Anyway, until next time, I wish you and yours the very happiest of gaming. Now, for those of you that have stuck around for the bonus section, there wasn't one, because this video was done before I thought about bonus sections, so I didn't prepare a slide. Oops, I'm going to give you an insight anyway. What we have done in terms of vehicle combat to try and make it that much more interesting is that we have taken a standard vehicle. Let's take, for example, a wagon. And we would say, right, what could the driver of the wagon do in terms of wagon stuff? Well, quite frankly, the driver can steer the wagon. That's boring, so that's kind of just assumed to be happening. The driver could try and perhaps ramp the wagon over things. Think about car chases where the cars rock up onto their side so that they have a narrower profile so they can fit through stuff. So you could have perhaps a two-wheeled action where the character rolls the vehicle up onto its two wheels. You could have it where they plant the brakes on one side of the wagon and spin it around 180 degrees. It's going to confuse the hell out of the horses, but it could entirely be possible. A third option might be to let the horses cut the horses free. So the horses charge off into the distance and the wagon continues rolling in another direction. That could be something. Tying extra rope to those horses, so as they charge off, it looks as if the wagon and the horses are separated until suddenly that rope pulls tight and it pulls the wagon in a random new direction. That could be something that improves the armor class of the wagon, because those that are trying to shoot at it anticipated it going that way, and now it's going that way. The driver could also take evasive maneuvers where they're weaving that wagon about. That's certainly something that could happen too. Another option could be perhaps to flip the wagon. I know it sounds completely insane, but if you pull hard right on a wagon, it's going to flip side over side, I should say, if they wanted to land back on its wheels. Again, this is crazy stuff here. They pull the pin out of the yoke to the horses so that the horses don't get flicked around. The wagon spins twice, lands on its wheels, and continues going. Perhaps that will grant everybody in the wagon full protection from whatever's shooting at them. Of course, it would also prevent them from shooting back. So you can really let your mind wander and look at things going, well, that's entirely possible. Now let's think of a passenger sitting inside that wagon. The passenger has no wagon driving skills, so arguably they can't be of value there. They also have no ranged attacks because they're just not that kind of character. So are they going to just sit in the wagon and do nothing? No. Think about wagons. Maybe there's some wooden boards on the base of the wagon. Maybe the wagon has a canvas top which needs to be erected. So something that the character could do would be to erect that canvas top, or to pull the boards up to make a temporary shield. So that shield would then absorb any incoming damage for a certain amount of time before collapsing. That then same character could perhaps start throwing barrels off of the back of the wagon to cause the pursuing wagon distress, causing it to have to swerve out of the way. You can come up with a whole list of different things that each of the different characters could in theory do whilst taking their own actions, or in that period where the wagons are still closing to one another. Of course, if it's a vehicle, truck or a modern day car, there are other things that the characters can do to try and cause the vehicle following them some kind of distress, or the vehicle next to them some kind of distress. I think it's always about trying to think outside of the box. When we let our minds go free for ship combat, what can two ships do whilst pursuing each other? I think we finally settled on about 34 different actions that could be taken to hinder, harry, improve, or develop the situation in vehicular combat. So it is definitely an option. You just need to be open to possibilities. Until next time, however, thanks for watching. Goodbye.